You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next maybe an hour, we're going to be talking about a Doctor Who story where a companion of colour who works in a hospital gets abducted from said hospital in a kind of a timey-wimey fashion, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm John.
I am Matt.
And no, even though this is the companion of colour who follows the much younger blonde companion who preceded her, we're not talking about Smith and Jones this time. We're talking about the Robot Revolution, which is the start of the very last season of Doctor Who, if rumours are to be believed. I
For
don't know.
now.
Sorry, John.
For now.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, RTD weirdly seems to be hinting at that. But Matt and I were talking last night, and it's like it probably is just a case of he's given straightforward answers to questions that are being repeated without the question to set the context. And so, therefore, it might be that it's kind of all taken a bit out of context.
Yeah,
But
there's that newsround thing, isn't there?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think part of that is, as Mike says, kids, it's a much longer, it seems much longer for them than it does for us as adults. So I
Well,
think
yeah.
maybe just preparing them for there's going to be a couple of years, maybe.
It could be that because it's going to be a couple of years, whatever happens. And actually, before RTD2, it had been nearly, well, 2.5 years anyway, since the previous series. We'd only had a few specials in the meantime. So it's not like there's been an awful lot of Doctor Who anyway for the last kind of nearly 5 years now, I suppose.
Well,
And
and
just on
that's
that,
why TV works these days as well.
well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, people say that if you go back to Out of the Unknown, right? The second series of Out of the Unknown was a year after the first series of Out of the Unknown. And then the third, and so by this point, you're only just over a year into Out of the Unknown's life. The third series of Out of the Unknown comes 2 years after the second series, and then the fourth series of Out of the Unknown comes 4 years after the third series. So actually, it's four series spread across a period of 7+ years. I mean, I've got some of that slightly wrong, but it is more or less around about that. People expect weird things from TV that they don't always get. And speaking of which, before we go in to talk about the actual episode, for some reason this popped into my head, so I looked it up before we started, because people are always banging on about how Series 1 and Series 2 were recorded back to back, right? The new Series 1, the Shoot to Get where Series 1 and Series 2 were recorded back to back. So I thought, well, I'm sure that wasn't the case, and I keep saying it wasn't the case, so let's go and check. So the period in between recording back in 2004 when they finished, or 2005 when they finished series one and started series two, was 3 months, right? There was 3 months in between series one and series two, and again 3 months between two and three, and between three and four. Would you like to guess exactly how long recording stopped between Shooty Gatwa series one and series two?
Well,
6 months.
maximum of five, because I know they were
Oh,
filming
No,
in
it's
June
three.
for
It's
Empire Protection.
three.
exactly
Oh,
the
Yeah,
same.
okay.
It's
There we
three.
go.
Exactly the same. So it
yeah, because
stopped for exactly the same period of time as it always has done.
yeah, the confidential gives you that they were filming on November the 30th, I think, for this.
Yeah, something I can't remember. I did look it up and I don't have it
It's
written in
yeah,
front of
it's
me,
on
but
the sorry, the Unleashed. The Unleashed has the
yeah, yeah.
date and it tells you when it exactly when it's filmed.
I tell you what I did find out because I've never looked into this, so it hadn't really occurred to me. But I what I did do was I looked at the dates. In old money, a series of Doctor Who would record for 9 months and have 3 months off, and then record for 9 months and have 3 months off. And obviously, over the last few years, that's changed every now and again, according to various different things. Like, are we planning on having a series on at this time of year or at this time of year? So can we take a bit of extra time or whatever? And then obviously there were things like COVID, which halted production and stuff like that. But generally speaking, it's been 9 months. And they always tell us this is the amount of Doctor Who we can record in the normal amount of time. So 13 episodes went up to 14 when they added a Doctor Light episode. Then that squeezed back down to 13 when Stephen Moffat took over, or about the time of Peter Capaldi. And then when Chris Chibnall took over, that squeezed down to 11, 10 and a special. Now it's eight in a special, so you think, oh, it must be taking longer to make Doctor Who than it ever has. But no, the truth is they're shooting for 7 months of the year instead of nine. So actually, we could have 10 in a special still, but they've chosen not to make Doctor Who for 9 months of the year. So I just thought that was another odd thing that doesn't get spoken about that you never really seem to see on the internet. Anyway,
It's choice, surely, isn't it? It's just
well, it is a choice, yeah.
they know that 9 months flat out kills you on Doctor Who,
Hmm.
so it makes more sense for them to have that gap in to try and make production more sustainable. Whether that is more sustainable, of course, different story.
Well, there you go. Well, and they only still took 3 months off. They could have taken 5 months off and done it entirely differently. It was just odd things that I just went on a slight dive into just before we started recording. Still, we are recording, and people want to know what we thought of the episode. So here's a few more things that I've got that are sort of points of order before we talk. No, John, what did you think of the Robot Revolution?
I went in expecting a Russell T Davies season opener, and it's pretty much what I got. It's there to set up the relationship between him and Belinda. It does a score on that. It's got some nice kind of retro-ish design work on it. Yeah, we all watched it 8 o'clock this morning. Enjoyed it. I don't think it'll be, one of those long-lasting ones. It'll be forgotten by halfway through the series. But yeah, it's fine as a season opener. It worked, I think, better than Space Babies did.
Way better. For me, I think I was expecting a Russell T Davies season opener, and what I got was a Stephen Moffat season opener as written by Russell T Davies, I
It
think.
a lot of cover work in there. Yeah, I
There
thought.
was an awful lot of stuff in there that's the kind of stuff you usually see in Stephen Moffat episodes and particularly season openers. And I'll come back to some of that because some of them were choices that I think are worth little conversations in their own right as to, oh, why has he done this and why has he changed it and so on and so forth. Matt, what did you think?
I quite liked it. I preferred it, obviously, to Space Babies. I thought it was more,
Some
more,
people loved Space Babies.
yeah, but I thought it was more expansive than Space Babies. It looked more ambitious.
Yeah.
Like John, I liked its retro futurism. So I think this is I'm starting to see Russell T Davis's kind of vision for him coming back from Doctor Who, and it's kind of based on those three David Tennant specials because this had a lot of the Star Beast in it, and next week looks like it's got a lot of the Giggle in it. So it's sort of kind of toyetic, retro futuristic kind of rocket ships that look like rocket ships, robots
Forbidden
that look like
Planet.
robots.
Yeah, Forbidden
Yeah,
Planet.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I like that because that actually feels like he's putting a stamp on it that's distinct from what he did before and
He's
what
giving
Stephen
it
Moffat did and Chris Chibnall. So it's
he's giving it an
RTD's
aesthetic, right?
yeah, RTD2 is getting an identity, which I appreciate. Whether I like it or not is another matter. I kind of don't mind it. Um, and yes, there was sort of the time travel bits in it, which to be honest, there are bits I didn't like particularly about it.
Yeah.
But that might change during the season because a lot of those bits are kind of heavy-handed teasers for, oh, this piece of paper is important, and we will reveal
Yeah.
why it's important in 8 weeks' time. So, it all depends on that reveal.
Well, the time thing is like kind of a mirror of what he did with the Church on Ruby Road, isn't it?
Hmm.
So in Church on Ruby Road, the Doctor has to go back in time for the companion. Here, it's almost like the companion has kind of not piggybacked. What's it called when you jump over somebody in the playground? It's not called
Piggy
piggy. No, it's not called piggybacking. When you go
leapfrogged.
right, leapfrogged.
Yeah.
There, it's he's got to go back in time. Here, it's she's kind of leapfrogged him, sort of, or something, which is very Moffat-y. So on that subject, one of the things that Stephen Moffat would often do is he would introduce the companion as a child and then have the Doctor catch up with them as a grown-up. And what that always said to, and some people said, oh, it makes the Doctor like a stalker or a whatever. But to me, what that did was it said to the children watching in the audience, here's a 10-year-old, and that 10-year-old is going to be the Doctor's companion, just like you're a 10-year-old, and then you can imagine that you could be the Doctor's companion. And so for me, it speaks to who Stephen Moffat thought the sort of principal audience was, is basically the sort of 8 to 12-year-olds, whatever, the sort of bang average about 10-year-old, I think, is what he was writing for. Here, Russell T Davies does the same thing, but I think he kind of gives himself away because the younger version of the companion that he goes back for is, I don't think it's specified on screen, but you kept seeing the number 17, so I'm guessing she's 17 then, and she's 17 years older when he comes back for her. But that kind of says to me that the principal audience that Russell T Davies is writing for is not the 10-year-olds, but the 17-year-olds. And so
Mid teens, yeah.
yeah, yeah, somewhere around. Rose was 16, wasn't she, supposedly? And Ruby is again about 16, 17. And so this is the 16, 17-year-old who then becomes a companion when she's 17 years older than that again. So it just strikes me that Russell T Davies is very much making this for the mid-teenagers rather than the
Well,
pre-teenagers.
I mean, I think if what you're saying holds water, and if Russell T Davies agrees with what you're saying, he is. But the design, the look of it, the simplicity of the story, that's very much aimed at 10-year-olds who want toy robots. So
Or
it's kind
people
of,
who
you
remember
know,
Forbidden Planet.
well,
I think
possibly,
it's,
but
but
people who
yes,
remember Forbidden Planet will be, that means he's aiming it at the 70-year-olds.
yeah, no, but Matt, Doctor Who is always aimed at a variety of different ages, but
Yeah,
there is always a principal age. When Terence Dicks was doing it, it was
yeah.
the 8 to
Uh,
12-year-olds. When Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes were doing it, they aged it up so that it was the 12 to 15-year-olds. I'm just saying, I think Stephen Moffat's principal audience was the 10-year-olds, and Russell T Davies's principal audience is the 17-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm disagreeing with that. I think his principal audience is the 10-year-olds because I think the design, the look, the tone of it outweighs the fact that you're seeing the companion as a 17-year-old at the beginning. I don't think I
But
don't
then
think
what's it a
the
story
age,
about?
sorry,
But then what's it a story about?
it's about a lady who's whisked off to another planet and
Well, no, that's what happens to her, but what's the story about? It's about an incel. It's about a relationship between two teenagers that goes south. It's about the way the male in that relationship reacts badly to it and asserts his control over not just her, but everything around him. So this is not a story for 10-year-olds. It even features
well, no,
the
but
word
if you
sperm at one point.
but those are the details of the story. The story is about a bad man who becomes this AI figure on an alien planet with robots. If there are details that are more complicated for older
Well,
viewers,
no,
but I don't think
that's
that's the principal thing of the
oh no,
the main takeaway I got from the episode
that's the
was the
story.
was the
That's not what the
robot.
story's about. I asked what the
No,
story was
and what I'm
about,
what I'm
not what
saying
the
is
story was.
and what I'm saying is the look of it and what the story is outweighs what the story is about. And so I think this is for 10-year-olds with bits for the older viewer.
Okay. John, what do you think? Is it for 10-year-olds or 17-year-olds? Or
Huh?
24-year-olds?
It's for both. It's Russell T Davies trying to aim something in there for everyone
I bet that
because
fence
that's
is
what he
sore
tries. He
between
go,
who.
yeah, he goes for a mass audience. That's what he does. He wants the widest
Yeah.
possible audience for Doctor Who. So there's some of us can go, oh, that bit reminds me a bit of Superman 3. That bit reminds me of Forbidden Planet. That bit reminds me of the robots on dinosaurs on a spaceship or Husbands of River Song. So he's trying for the older viewers as well, but this Russell T was specifically brought back to try and engage that younger audience, that kids and teenagers. So whether that's successful or not is a different matter, but that's what he's there to do.
But
So
but
It
but
was
also
principally teenagers, wasn't it? Because that's
yeah,
what they were talking about, the BBC Three audience.
but
yes.
also look at watching this, comparing it to Rose, Deep Breath, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, Flux. This is definitely pitched in at least the way it looks and the way it's told to younger viewers than those stories. I mean, taking out this idea that children see themselves on screen, and there are bits of it that are sort of aimed at adults and are about adult themes. But the actual look at it, it felt bright and it primary colours. The Doctor's emotions are very, very clear and sort of primary coloured. She's quite a sort of a specifically drawn character. It didn't look sophisticated. It looked like it was, whether he's successful or not, it looked like a person making a television for children.
It's almost a cartoon again.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Is that not just Russell T Davies, though?
Yeah, totally, because that's where he gets his
Yeah.
inspiration from. Generally, he's a very visual kind of guy with that writing. He cartoons, loves the car, and obviously we'll see that more next week. But it's very primary colors, I think.
Yeah, but more so than his first run.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because CGI is cheaper now or better or easier now.
I think
But
it's also about the cameras, isn't it? In the first
yeah,
run, it was SD cameras, and SD cameras tend to muddy things up. So your primary colors won't pop in SD, whereas your primary colors will pop in HD. So I think that's part of it too.
hmm yeah,
But seeing as we were on the sort of, well, this has had its thunder stolen. I mean, in terms of what it ultimately ends up saying, this has kind of had its thunder stolen a bit by adolescence, hasn't it?
yeah. I thought that was a pro. I thought there were two problems with the whole the incel line. I thought was probably it was a bit weird because this isn't what that is. I mean, this is just an abusive guy that gets zapped into an alien planet, and he's the controlling guy. I don't know where the incel thing came from. It was just a line.
Yeah, because the incels can't talk to girls. It's not what they try to
Yeah,
impose their will on them.
yeah,
But to be fair to Russell T Davies, he did try to show that at the start of the episode. So the conversation that we do see them have at the start, he finds it difficult to talk to her. He finds it difficult to connect with her, and there are things. So that's kind of foreshadowed the sort of Planet of the Incels line.
yeah.
For me, the problem there was, and cards on the table, I enjoyed it. I just thought it was enjoyable but slight.
Mhm.
And I think that's pretty much the tale of most Russell T Davies series openers. And I just think sometimes it's like, just take a bit more care about showing us things. So for me, the issue with the Planet of the Incels line was he clearly foreshadowed that at the start of the episode, that cold open. But then he didn't bother showing us any of that when we got to the planet. So you're right. When he says, or whoever it is says, oh, it's the planet, it's her, isn't it? Verada
Yeah,
Sethu
Yeah.
says
yeah,
it's the planet of the incels. That comes out of nowhere because nothing on that planet has indicated it's the planet of the incels. In fact, the person who greets them when they get there, what do they call it? I've got it written down somewhere. She's described as the people's representative. This woman, Sasha, if it was the planet of the incels, surely the people's representative who comes to meet the new folk would be a man.
so I
It
guess
just felt like an odd choice.
And the
thinking about it,
historian wouldn't be a person of color here.
and having
Yeah.
having said I didn't understand where it came from, I guess the flashback to him proposing and her turning him down, and then the next shot is him having created a planet based on this spurned proposal. That
Yeah.
is an incel thing. So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
probably what that refers to. It's not the fact that the planet is a planet of incels. It's a planet based around his motivations of being spurned by a woman.
Plus, it's how she sees him more than anything else. It's not necessarily an accurate
Yeah,
diagnosis.
Hmm.
yeah.
Absolutely. I just felt as an audience member we could have seen a bit more of that.
The second problem I had, which was actually addressed towards the end, but not quite, is there was a lot about how controlling he was, and that just made me kind of think about the Doctor and how controlling the Doctor. And in my mind, it flashed back to the classic series and to, you know, the new series. Every time the Doctor has sort of tried to tried to control his companion, tried to manipulate his companion, tried to dress his companion.
There's that
It's
bit,
or
isn't
her.
there, where she says to him, "Oh, this is the reason why it's all happening," and shows him the certificate. And he says, "Oh, I'll take that and I'll put it in my pocket and I'll keep it safe." And
Yeah.
even right there and then, you're thinking, this is going to be about agency. but the way you make it about agency isn't about making it. I mean, it doesn't reflect well on the Doctor that he's not somebody who can understand the concept of agency and then has to basically have it explained to him. And he
Yeah.
does make that a thing. And
Hmm.
at the end, the Doctor does give the agency back to Belinda,
Yeah.
but it's
And
a slightly
yeah,
convoluted journey to get there, isn't it?
she does call him out on it. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think this is something we're going to see over the season. I think it'll be a much more interesting dynamic than we had last season. As Carolyn said to me the other day, or sorry, this morning, Ruby was more of a kind of a Labrador. She was that kind of eager traveler in time and space. She wasn't calling the Doctor out on stuff really. Whereas we got signs here, Belinda does call her out. So I think we're in for a kind of more dramatically interesting dynamic than we saw last year.
And
It's a
actually, we
bit
haven't
like
had
the.
we.
I
Sorry,
was
go
only
on.
going to say it's a bit like the changing dynamic between Rose and Martha, right? Not
Yeah,
exactly the same,
I
but a
take
bit
Rose,
like it.
Martha, and Donna.
Yeah, yeah.
but it's not quite like any of them. So this is a sort of a new dynamic. So she's kind of Moffat-y in terms of, she's gonna speak her mind
She's
when
Clara.
when she can. Yeah. But it's sort of a little bit beyond that. I hope I feel like she is a distinctive character, which is nice, which is good.
One of the things about Clara is she did have her own personality, and part of that personality was, no, I'm not going with you right now. You can come back and pick me up at 7 o'clock,
Yeah.
sort of thing, which she said in her first episode, right? Or first episode as the 21st century Clara. But then the other thing was, it was about Stephen Moffat wanted that character to be at the center of a mystery. And we keep saying this, and people keep misunderstanding this. Clara is not a mystery. There is a mystery in which Clara is involved. And in the end, Clara becomes the thing that causes that mystery to happen. But Clara in herself is not the mystery. And the same thing happened last year with Ruby, and the same thing is happening this year with Belinda. And probably we'll get to the end and it'll turn out that Belinda is not a Zygon in disguise or Sutek in disguise or something, or, Sutek's minion or something like that or whatever, but just a normal person caught up in something weird that's happening.
Yeah, I
Presumably that'll
mean
be what it is.
the that was part of it, wasn't it? I think this is part of a knowing commentary on Stephen Moffat episodes in here because
Hmm.
it's what's her history? Oh, she looks just like this woman I met last year. Oh, she was just a great, 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 etc. granddaughter. Great,
Yeah,
that's it. It's all done.
Yeah. Well, that's also
probably.
because I
Yeah,
obviously I didn't buy that she was seeded last year. This was like an actor that they really enjoyed working with,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
who auditioned much like Freema Agyeman did, and Catherine Tate did effectively.
and
Yeah, yeah.
Karen Gillan.
Yeah, and Karen Gillan.
All of them. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and basically the same thing has happened again. Yeah, and you're right. Probably that is done and brushed under the carpet now, and so we've made reference to it. I'm not entirely sure that doesn't come back because,
I think it will come back.
yeah,
I
Russell.
think there's touches. There's something about when he says how the DNA is perfect and it's a
Yeah,
perfect and how I bumped into you and how what a chance that is that I'm bumping into versions of you in the future.
mind you, once before we assumed something like that would come back, and it didn't. So it's hard to say whether it will or not. But I think you're right. It felt like Russell T Davies was dotting the I on it being the same actor, but leaving the T uncrossed as to what that necessarily meant.
Yeah, Graham's cancer never came back. So,
But only some of us thought it would. Some of us assumed
well,
it wasn't going to.
yeah,
His worry about it came back though.
that's true.
Yeah. So Russell T Davies is now doing this story for the second time in a row. That the mystery of the season, the arc of the season, is the mystery that surrounds the companion. Is it wrong of him to do it 2 years in a row?
I mean, the obvious mystery to me is why is that date blocked off? Why can the Doctor not get back to Earth? And what obviously that last shot, why have we got the Eiffel Tower, the London taxi, etc., just spinning in a void?
And why is it famous landmarks that are spinning in a void together and
Because
not
Russell T
like
Davies still remembers
yeah.
the shock of seeing Statue of Liberty or whatever get blown up in Independence Day. It wasn't Statue of Liberty, was it? It was.
Oh, how about Planet of the Apes?
Oh yeah, no, but I think specifically when they were doing Rose, they name checked Independence Day, didn't they? Because they in
Oh,
Independence Day they blew up all the famous buildings, Empire State Building and whatever. And I think that's what he was going for. Yeah. So there's a thing going on here, and I've forgotten what I was about to say. So I'm just kind of umming and ahhing while it comes back into my head, which is clearly not happening. The stuff at the end, or the stuff involving him, I wonder as well, and I thought this last year, and it turned out not to be the case, because because this year, the same as last year, we've got this weird timey-wimey thing in the episode that introduces the companion. So last time it was Church on Ruby Road rather than Space Babies. But in the episode that introduces the companion, there's not just a mystery about the companion, but there's also a weird timey-wimey thing about how they meet the Doctor in the first place. And then this year we've got this thing that looks like slightly a reflection of 73 yards last time. So last time you've got Ruby going off on her own without the Doctor into sort of parallel universes or whatever, something that's not quite right in the timelines. This year, we've got this thing, haven't we, where episode 4 looks like it's going to be about Ruby and the bloke who will be the villain in episode 7 in a sort of political thriller kind of a way, potentially. So there's a suggestion that there's something coming up in episode 7 that's seeded in episode 4 that looks not entirely dissimilar to what you had in the cold open here. So last year you had a bunch of stuff, didn't you, where you had, so this is the cause and effect of what happens when you unsync yourself from time. So Ruby getting taken back into the past at the time of her birth, at the start of the series in Church on Ruby Road, and then at the end again in the finale. And then you get the thing where they go back in time and step on a butterfly, and you get to see what the world looks like if that doesn't get repaired, and so on and so forth in the episode after that. So the first 3 episodes last year all have this weird. So we're foreshadowing weird things about what happens when time goes out of sync or when you unsync yourself from time. This year, I am getting already just 1 episode in. I'm getting the impression that there's going to be a. So, Planet of the Incels is one way of putting it, but what happens to blokes when they are, I don't know, spurned or in some way, when they're unsynced from by the companion, where do they go off to and what do they do? So I don't know, it could just be coincidence, but I'm very definitely getting a suggestion here
it's
that this storyline could be foreshadowing for the finale.
well, it's there in Joy to the World at the end, isn't it? Because at the end of that, she says you need someone.
Yeah,
So,
potentially.
so there's something being set up there, I think. Because I know it's a very Moffat thing to say.
Yeah, yeah. But
So,
it feels like it's either weird coincidence or deliberate. And last year, it didn't quite seem to lead to anywhere. But again, it felt like more than coincidence, doesn't it? 3 episodes in a row to do the what happens when time goes wrong illustration felt like a weird thing to do if it wasn't just coincidence, if it wasn't just more than coincidence. I don't know. So coming back to Mrs. Flood, obviously we get Mrs. Flood again, don't we? And again, she looks at the camera and says that I wasn't here thing. When I thought the moment where she waves her off to potentially be taken to her death in outer space, just says bye. That was fun.
oh God, yeah.
Yeah,
Also, I just thought, was it? It was basically a far show catchphrase. So is she just going to last episode just going to be her going the full Roly Birkin? You're going to
yeah,
get
yeah,
her going, oh, suits you, sir, halfway through the episode or something.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
But
I like her.
I'm just wondering aloud if the whole 2 series are going to end up being, in some ways, a continuing story, probably about Mrs. Flood, or at least including Mrs. Flood, that does have something to do with that has something to do with time going out of sync and also to do with sort of spurned males being the cause of it, or something, or some connection between the two. I don't know, but it just kind of feels a bit like that because actually in 73 yards, what's his face, Ap Gwilym, is also very much in that sort of conversation as well, isn't he? He's basically a rapist, we see in that, or sexual predator at the very sort of, the best you could say about him. But there's definitely a thing going on.
I mean, I guess there is, but there's also a thing going on in the real world that Russell T
Well, for
Davies is
sure.
writing about. So he's kind of picking up on at the risk of suggesting it's all about Trump.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah, but
but
you're right.
Trump and his like and Musk are kind of looming large when RTD is writing, and we know from years and years that um, he does like writing about what he can see around him.
Well, absolutely. And
I
if you
mean,
go
this is
back
the
to,
interesting me to with this season as opposed to last season. Last season, Mrs. Flood was in it, but we knew that she probably wasn't going to be the big main villain. So there was always that mystery. Now we know that she is going to be the big thing in this season, and that kind of takes a bit of the mystery out. I mean, I really like the Sutex stuff because,
but we still don't know what she's going to be. So I suppose there's
no,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a mystery I'm interested in.
yeah, and there's definitely other things coming into play as well. I still not convinced that she's necessarily going to be the villain, but just something
No,
that's
no,
there,
yeah.
maybe to
God,
counterpoint the villain. I don't know.
was it something like a line that they're going to battle the whole unholy trinity in the final episode? So I don't think she's going to be an unholy trinity on her own. She
Mm.
might be part of it, but not all of it.
Well, let me put a suggestion based on a. So this is based on a rumor or speculation that I don't think is necessarily one that people believe. But okay, for anybody who's really sensitive to potential spoilers, fast forward for like 60 seconds or something. So Matt's pretend, and so this is just, so let's say one of them's the White Guardian, one of them's the Black Guardian, and one of them is a balanced Guardian. So that would be a trinity, but one of them would be a goodie, one of them would be a baddie, and one of them would be completely neutral. So
I'm
let's,
halfway going. Is it the gods of Ragnarok? Because they're the obvious past, right?
yeah,
And Russell James liked his past, events.
but for sure, anything like that could potentially be something like the Mara, even potentially. But I guess what I'm saying is you can easily divide something like the Gods of Ragnarok or whatever, one of those things up into a trinity. Because Russell T Davies is not doing the past the way the past was done. He's just taking the ideas from the past and reinventing them for his version of Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's more fantastical ideas from the past. It's not the more science-based ones, say.
So for sure, he could pull something out of the past and reinvent it as some kind of a trinity. And that could mean that whoever we've seen so far could end up being the baddie or could end up being the goodie or could end up completely neutral.
Hang on,
Right now.
JR is about to lose his voice. Let's talk about the episode quickly.
What did you, okay, let's talk about stylistic things before we get back into some of the sort of meat and veg of what's it about. What did you think of the robots, Matt?
So I didn't think I was going to. I did like the robots. I thought they were kind of charming. It's not retrofuturism isn't something that really does it for me, that kind of big bright comic strip stuff. I'm more of a kind of a grim dark kind of set it in Victorian London, please. But in terms of if that's what they're aiming for, I think this was a pretty successful go at it. Also the trippy bits where the time jumps are
Yeah, yeah.
happening towards the end, really good. And again, really comic book. They're like comic strip panels, sort of Doctor Strange type stuff. Um, really feels like it's sort of. It reminded me a bit of those bits in Deep Breath, the kind of the Ben, what's his name?
And Wheatley.
Ben Wheatley stuff, where he's just about allowed to do something a little bit trippy and a little bit weird. And in this one, it really goes sort of strange. The kind of the illustrations of the time reversals and the time jumps.
I felt it
Um,
could have been a bit snappier. It felt like it slowed down a bit too much for that. But
poss
yeah,
Possibly, I thought that. the pacing was the sort of the trippy bit. I don't know. I like the fact that it was distinctive. I like the fact that, it felt a bit different. And at this stage, after 20 years of new Doctor Who, to see something a little bit different is quite exciting.
On the robots, to be fair, in Doctor Who over the past 20 years, we've seen retro future robots like that at least half a dozen times before. So I think that's just the way Doctor Who does robots at the
Yeah.
Yeah.
moment,
And
frankly.
there's the emoji bot faces as well,
Yeah, they had that as
which was really
well.
cool.
Yeah.
But I think they did it really well this time. I think this time it did feel. I mean, I quite liked it before. I think they did it quite well before, but this time I was worried that it would feel like the smile robots, hand bots,
Yeah, yeah.
dinosaurs on the spaceship robots, and it did feel like that. But it was done really well. They had sort of personality and the way they moved and also the emojis, the invention of which emojis to show were quite there was quite a lot of jokes in this, which I
And
appreciated.
they were primitive emojis as well, which I really liked on that.
Yeah. I also quite liked we didn't quite get it, but it was almost suggesting there was going to be a kind of recreation of that Superman 3 robotizing scene.
Yeah.
Because, for years that's been a sort of a meme that people have been were terrified of it as a child.
But just for a
Um,
second, I thought we were getting another Origins of the Cyberman thing because
yeah,
you
well,
saw that, and then all of a sudden he says, "We're going to take your emotions away and make you pure, sort of logical person almost."
yeah.
I
Yeah,
just
but they
wondered where it was going.
yeah, they didn't show it, which probably was the sensitive thing to do. Oh, but I liked Al. Um the actor once he was sort of robotized is kind of really quite sinister and quite poignant when he's sort of sending out coded messages about him being in pain. And then I think, the doctor basically destroying him before he was even born. That's
I,
maybe a
the
misguided jokey bit.
it was the cute robot destroyed and not the Doctor.
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
basically, sort
yeah,
of.
It's
yeah,
funny.
It was a flashback to Boomtown, wasn't it? We're going to take you back to the egg.
yeah,
Yes.
yes. But
I mean, there was nothing whatsoever.
In Boomtown, the doctor sensitively took the egg, took it back to the home planet
Yeah,
so
yeah.
she can be brought back. In this one, the doctor made a joke as the little robot sweeper swept up the baddie.
I mean, if he was in a egg that was just sitting there on the floor, I don't think he was long for this world anyway, frankly.
No, no, well,
Well, they can't survive outside the human body that long, can they? I don't think.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
And
they
There
certainly the
was
tried.
sperm wouldn't.
no, there was nothing in this episode that we hadn't seen before. So basically, it was really about how it was put together, which again, I'll say was mostly fun. I think it mostly worked. I just, my overall takeaway from this was it was fun, but everything about it was superficial. In other words, all the things that were important about it were things that we were told rather than things we saw, like why, the reason why all these things happen. We were told about really rather than seeing, and so on and so forth. But then I guess it's Doctor Who. I, I, part of me thinks I wish he'd made slightly more wise choices. So there are lots of talky bits again. So this thing about every ninth word, that just made that scene go on forever, which is okay, but couldn't you have made it every fourth word? Do you know? Do you know what I mean? I don't know if there's any particular reason why it had to be every ninth word. And then weirdly, he brings it back when Al is the AI thing and is talking and doesn't seem to do anything with it. Did I miss something? He
But
didn't do anything.
there's a very short flashback where it explains it, and I think the owl doing it is the reason behind it because that gives an extra depth to his character. He's sort of, encased in this sort of robotized stuff, but he's sending coded messages saying, "I'm actually in pain. I'm."
Yeah, but weird, yeah. But it was weird because he seemed to be sending this coded message, but then what we see on screen, I need to rewatch it again. But it felt to me watching it the first time, like what we saw on screen didn't bear up to the fact that he was trying to send out a coded message. So I don't know.
Possibly. I think we saw
But
we saw him talking, and then it flashed back to demonstrate the coded
yeah,
messages,
yeah.
which is good. And I think having it as the every ninth letter meant that or ninth word meant that the joke worked that she was having to count. She was basically
Yeah, yeah.
not forming sentences, and the doctor's able to make this whole speech and just drop in these words, whereas she's trying to count. If it was every fourth, it would be a bit more sort of,
Your dialogue is gone. Your
yeah,
rhythms are out.
yeah.
Sure, yeah, but do you know what I mean? It just meant that that scene kind of went on for a long time, and we had two or three scenes that at the end. As short as this episode was, and as much as it needed to get through, it still managed to squeeze in 4 or 5 minutes of them in the TARDIS at the end. And after about the fifth time, where he says we're bouncing off May the 24th, I was like,
Yeah.
fine, we've got the message. And then he does it for another 4 times again, basically.
Yeah, he's not quite at Eric Sayward levels of padding at the beginning and an end inside a TARDIS, but
But it was getting there.
Russell T Davis does tend to do this. I mean, from his
Mm,
his final episode is the thing I've
totally.
always got a problem with the 15-minute bye bye Russell T Davis bit where he goes through all of his hits.
Well, he even did that last
And
year,
yeah,
except
and
kind of
last
with
year, yeah,
Ruby, yeah.
yeah.
And he
So
he
so
does that
this is
right.
him.
Yeah, yeah, it's what he does. But sometimes you just wish he'd take a little bit of that out and put a little bit more into the story itself, because sometimes the story feels like it's just an excuse to get to the ending.
And whereas Moffat, again, is is a better writer because than the last Christmas special, Moffat has the Doctor hanging around for a year, and he sort of shows that that's a long sequence in the middle where he's building an entire relationship out of little flashes into the life
Makes
over
it the
the year,
story. Yeah.
stretches it out. Whereas in this episode, Russell T Davies is doing the same. The Doctor's been here for
six
how
months.
six
Yeah.
months, but we don't see those flashes. We just see the beginning, and it's
Yes.
almost like that's been sacrificed for an opening scene in the hospital and then a closing scene in the TARDIS.
When Sasha gets killed off and the doctor sheds a tear and the music is telling us you're having an emotional moment, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm not actually having an emotional moment because I have
Yeah.
no idea who this person is.
I mean, I felt sadder when the cat was killed, and nobody seemed to
Oh,
Well,
care that much.
I laughed
But
when the cat was killed, I have to
okay,
say.
I noticed
I
that
did
they
like the
didn't
death.
have it on screen, just the aftermath.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
just,
did
They're
like
very
the death.
careful with that.
The death effect, the death effects were good as
Oh, they
well.
were great.
They
Yeah.
were
yeah.
they were new because they weren't quite sort of Dalek exterminations. The freeze frame
Yeah.
really made them work well. And again, slightly sort of comic book, slightly kind of
Yeah, it reminded me of the
naive and
Zygon thing in the
primitive.
Zygon two-parter.
Yeah.
Not that they turned them into tumbleweeds,
Mm.
but the actual effect of, oh, we're going to do something slightly weird with people when they die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the Ice Warriors in Empress of on
Yeah.
Mars, where
Yeah.
Mars.
they kind of condensed them.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I did write a few things
Oh
down.
God, JR's written a few things down and now he's
Yeah, I
lost
know.
his train of thought. This is what happens when JR makes notes. The podcast basically stops because he's reading.
I
Because it's
hate
so
reading.
rare.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't usually do it. I think
yeah,
we've got through pretty much everything I did write down anyway.
yeah,
I wrote some things down because I wondered if I might forget things, but
yeah.
then
I mean, I'm positive. First episodes I never like, particularly Russell T Davis ones, I think, are always, I'm looking back. I mean, Smith and Jones is light, Partners in Crime is light, New Earth is very light, Rose is shit. Um,
Rose is great.
and
Outrageous.
and so
Black Archive's great though.
they're all kind of frothy and light. He doesn't hit the ground with a punch when he opens
I
his
think
series. So to watch this and actually think, actually, I kind of enjoyed that, and I like it looked good and it felt expansive. It makes me feel better than I did when I watched Space Babies, and I didn't feel all that bad when I watched Space Babies because I knew what a Russell T Davies opening episode was like.
I hated Space Babies.
Hmm.
As anybody who watched the video of us talking about it will know. I think Rose is great, but I think it's great in spite of certain things that essentially don't work. And I think Russell T Davies sometimes takes the wrong lessons from things. So Rose is fine. It gets away with not having a proper ending or a proper story
Hmm.
in terms of the sort of plot, because it
Yeah.
does have a proper story in terms of the narrative of Rose meeting the Doctor, but you can't just repeat that every time. And this has actually felt like it had more of a proper story here instead this time, which is perhaps why it works better.
I
You've
think
got to
Rose.
start and end. Yeah.
I think Rose is fine. I just don't think it has the depth to write, say, a big black archive on it without serious padding and writing about other things. It's just a little bit shallow. So I wouldn't, for instance, buy the black archive on Rose. I'd prefer to buy one on a classic series story that has sort of, depths in mythology and occultism. Sorry.
The Time Monster. Has anybody written
Yeah,
that yet?
absolutely.
No, yeah, no.
Oh, yeah, no.
Oh, well, Matt, there's your opening.
It'll be I basically just put a new cover on the demons and just put in the time monster. It's
Yeah,
pretty much similar.
Search and replace.
Yeah, yeah.
fair enough. What were you talking about? I completely lost my train of thought there.
He was on about Rose.
Oh yeah.
Again.
I didn't mind Rose. So Rose is an exception, but the other ones, Partners in Crime, Smith and Jones, they are frothy. They're
This
not
was.
like
Even New Earth, because
yeah,
that's interesting, doing the same thing for the Doctor, really.
yeah, especially New Earth, I think.
I think the closest this comes to any of those is to is to Smith and Jones.
Yeah.
It's got that weird thing where the Doctor's introduced in a sort of timey-wimey way, which this kind of does, but in a slightly different way. But then it's sort of you start off with the hospital setting, and then it's about abductions, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's a hospital, here it's a person, but it's about what's the reason for the abduction, isn't it? I liked I don't think it really added up to a lick of sense, to be honest, but I liked the reason why the abductor being the certificate.
Oh
That
yeah,
was,
that's lovely.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense because how the hell would they on that planet know that he gave her the certificate on planet Earth, right? So it doesn't make any sense at all. But it was a nice
It's one of those
story beat.
things you can skate over it. It's something light and something that people have heard of. They can get this relation, get to there, fine.
It it makes me think that if Doctor Who was thoroughgoing enough to make everything cohere with that idea, then it could be this lovely sort of poetic program that doesn't have any either of its 2 feet in reality, but that instead creates its own reality. A bit like, so nobody saw the Mysterious Benedict Society, right? It's about 4 kids who go off on an adventure against a mathematician, basically, who's trying to control the world, sort of a thing. And it's entirely filmed in pastel colors, and it's made for Disney, and it's one of the ones that's been withdrawn from the service. But it's this lovely thing that doesn't take place in any kind of reality. It's set in America, but it's filmed in like some German village to make it look entirely like a sort of fairy tale or something. It's an amazing program. And you just think ideas like that here, like this certificate being responsible for this whole thing where these robots come and get her. But that's one kind of logic. And then when the robots turn up and they're this sort of retro future thing, that's a different kind of logic. And when the Doctor turns up and does all his shenanigans, that's a different kind of logic again. So it's got all these different types of logics going on. I
It's
don't think any of them quite mesh together.
Russell T Davies is the wrong type of writer to do that fancy series because he had, there's that infamous
Yeah.
thing he said about the planet Zog. It
Yeah,
has
yeah.
to relate to planet Earth, has to, something the viewer can relate to. So you're running into his kind of limitations of his view as a writer in that case.
Yeah, yeah. And that's perfectly fine in its own right. But it just means that when he tries to introduce ideas like that, you go, that's a lovely idea. And then you start thinking about the logic of it because the rest of the story leads you to start thinking about the logic of it, doesn't it? Because otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get away with sticking in a line like it's the planet of the incels because the two things just do not go together as ideas. And yet, obviously, clearly, one comes out of the other in Russell T Davies has said, and he kind of gets away with it. And it certainly makes it entertaining enough. And, here's a spoiler from behind the scenes. I started rewatching it and I was doing fine and I was 10 or 15 minutes in and I was still quite enjoying it. And then the internet went off. Unfortunately, it came back in time for us to record, but I didn't get to watch the end of the episode because I was desperately trying to get the internet back on. But within the space of about 4 hours from the first time I watched it, I was quite happily watching it again. So it worked in that respect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll watch it again when it's on at it's 6:50 tonight.
Oh,
Quite happy
right,
to.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I watch it obviously with Eddie and Carolyn. They loved it as well. Same thing. So
All right. Yeah, yeah.
it does its job. Is fundamentally the point of the episode. I think.
I think a lot of these things work better if you're not looking at them too carefully.
Yeah,
And see, another perfect example is the way my brain works is I want to believe in the characters on the screen and I want to believe in the thought processes of the characters on the screen. And the bit where he introduces her to the TARDIS and he says it's bigger on the inside and she says, I know. And I'm thinking she's just walked in the door. She doesn't know that it's bigger on the inside, but she can see that it looks bigger on the inside. So her line, a real person would not say, I know. They'd say, I can see that because they've got the evidence of what's in front of their eyes, rather than having gone for a walk around it and having established that it is the thing that he says it is. So I get taken right out of the fiction when she says, I know, rather than I can see that. And I
but
bet I'm the only person who watched that episode who got taken out of it by that line, right?
but on the other hand, I was already sold by that when he tried to pull the timey-wimey line on it. Just well, what am I 6? That
Yeah,
was
that was a nice
great.
line. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, and again, that's a sort of come back to Moffat, isn't it?
Yeah, it's there's kind of lots of critiques of the Stephen Moffat thing. I think including the fact that there's not there the mysterious girl thing. Oh, there you go. We dealt with that in an episode.
Oh, 100% Clara. All those Russell T Davies lovers who hated Clara because she was this mystery that needed to be solved. Well, Russell T Davies has done it 2 years on the trot now, hasn't he?
Yeah, but then again, the Ruby one was so badly kind of tied into the arc. So I'm interested to see if it works this time.
He can't do the same thing again, can he?
No,
I don't
well,
know.
no,
He won't do exactly the same thing again, but well, I guess we'll see. I wouldn't be 100% surprised though if we don't see Al again. I know he sort of basically kills him off at the end, but I mean, when
could
he
be
gets
restored.
well, and absolutely, and when he gets swept into that robot, there's nothing to say that that robot doesn't get taken away and that egg doesn't get, hatched out into a person or whatever. Do you know what I
That
mean?
that little robot has its little baby.
Well, and we are
Incubates it.
looking at the end of the series. We've got an episode called Wish World and things like this. We are looking at the bending of parallel universes into each other
Yeah,
in one way or
is
another,
it
potentially.
the Reality Wars the last episode?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very much suggesting that.
So you could potentially get Al from a different universe. I didn't look up the name of the actor, but I just wonder if it's the same actor who's playing Ruby's boyfriend in episode 4. I don't think it is. I think it would have been remarked upon somewhere if that was the case, but it's not impossible. Or it could be that you get two different actors playing the same part, and the twist at the end of the series is they're the same person or something. I don't know. I'm just saying it could go any one of any number of ways, but this would be the most coherent, I think, to set things up and then pay them off. I don't know, anything more that either of you two wants to bring up then? We've been talking for longer than the episode already, I think, but we always do. But time to give it a score, maybe, unless either of you has
I mean,
more.
only that it felt a little bit like Smith and Jones, but then looking at it, Smith and Jones was 18 years ago, so
Yeah, yeah,
it's a bit like the
yeah.
equivalent of Ian Levine trying to recreate the Web of Fear in whenever it was.
And look
So
how that went.
it's sort of fair enough.
But someone's got a TV studio and someone's got some animators in a sweatshop somewhere
Yeah.
working for a fiver.
I'm going to give this a 7. I enjoyed it, but I thought it was pretty superficial. It could become less superficial, I suppose, as the series goes on. But as it was better than the usual Russell T Davies series openers. But, by margins. John,
Yeah, I was kind of swithering between a 7 and an 8. I think I'll go 7, but depending on how the season goes, it's got potential to go up afterwards.
Matt.
Oh, it's 7. Because I don't like the season openers. I quite like this one, but you've got to score it as you score it, and there's room for episodes to get scored higher as they get to the ones that I like the look of.
For sure. Right. Well, we'll be back next week then to talk about Lux, that's the one next week, isn't it? The
Mhm.
Yep.
cartoon that comes to life by the look of it. And as the series goes on, the number of us here reviewing these things might expand. There were two others who wanted to join us this week who were unable to, so it might be that they come back next week or the week after or soon after that. Who knows? By the time we get to the end of the series, it could be 10 of us here. Until these things happen, I was JR,
I was John.
I was Matt.
and we will speak again soon.